The battle begins for Mosul. It's the Iraqi army's long-awaited offensive to recapture the city from ISIL. But what will it take to force fighters from their last remaining stronghold in Iraq? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. It was the largest city in Iraq captured by ISIL fighters. Now it's the only one they have left, and not for much longer if the Iraqi army has its way. The battle has begun to recapture Mosul. Iraqi commanders say victory will mean the end of ISIL in Iraq. Iraq's armed forces, along with Kurdish, Sunni Arab and Shia allies, have been preparing for months. They have the backing of the United States, which describes the operation as a defining moment. So will the joint force be able to kick ISIL out of Iraq altogether? And how many civilians are in the firing line? We'll get to our guests in just a moment, but first, here's our correspondent Zaina Hodder. She's with the Peshmerga forces on the front line in northern Iraq.
As day broke, the ground advance began. Peshmerga forces, along with the Iraqi army, are taking the lead in the offensive. It was under the cover of darkness when they took up positions around the ISIL-controlled city. The much-awaited battle to recapture Mosul has started.
The time of victory has come, and hereby we announce the start of the offensive to retake the city of Mosul. We announce the start of the heroic operations to liberate you from the tyranny and the brutality of ISIL.
The US-led coalition is providing cover from the sky, but US troops are on the ground as well. Here, their role is advisory, but under the battle rules, they could accompany troops and be placed closer to direct combat. This is the beginning of what could be a long battle. ISIL has been preparing for this fight. It has fortified its positions and dug trenches around the city of Mosul. It can also use an estimated 1 million people inside Mosul as human shields. This is a complex operation. The Iraqi government said there are extensive plans to protect the city and minimize casualties. But in an urban battlefield, that may not be easy. There is kilometers of ground to take before reaching Mosul's city center, ISIL's only urban stronghold in Iraq. Troops have to advance slowly because of IEDs and booby traps. ISIL tried to halt the advance on this front using a suicide car bomber. The attempt failed when Peshmerga forces destroyed his vehicle. For now, the target, at least in the northern front lines, is to recapture the outlying villages, areas that are not densely populated, areas where it is easy to clear ground using artillery and airstrikes. The fight for Mosul has brought together an unlikely alliance of forces, bitter rivals who have competing interests, but for now have a common enemy. Mosul, because of its ethnic and sectarian diversity, has long been known as Little Iraq, and it may be in Mosul where Iraq's viability as a nation-state will be tested. Zaina Hodder, Al Jazeera.
The Iraqi army has been trying to defeat ISIL since it captured large areas of northern Iraq 2 years ago. So let's see who controls what. Mosul is the only remaining stronghold for ISIL in Iraq. The fighters waging war to establish a caliphate in Iraq have suffered losses of territory since last year. Most parts of Iraq are now controlled by government and Kurdish forces. Iraqi forces began their major offensive against ISIL in March 2015 in Tikrit, the hometown of Saddam Hussein. The Iraqi army was supported by Shia Muslim fighters and airstrikes from a coalition of countries led by the United States. Victory was declared in Tikrit a month later. The Iraqi army then moved on to the city of Ramadi in Anbar province, from where ISIL was forced to retreat in December 2015. Ramadi is strategically placed with roads to Syria and Jordan. Then in June of this year, the Iraqi army recaptured another major city in Anbar province, Fallujah, following a battle that lasted more than a month. Well, let's bring in our guests now. In Erbil, we have Judit Neurink, author of The War of ISIS on the Road to the Caliphate. In London, William Patey, a former British ambassador to Iraq. And in Boston, Hala al-Sarraf, founder of the Iraq Health Access Organisation. Thank you all very much for being here today. Judit, let me start with you. As we record this programme, it's coming to the end of the first day of this offensive in Mosul. What is happening on the ground?
A lot is happening on the ground. The Kurdish forces, the Peshmerga forces, say that they have already done what they were supposed to do for the day, and that was just after midday. They have captured 8 or 9 villages. I think it's probably 9. At the same time, the Iraqi army, we understand, have captured a very important place, Hammam Ali, which is really the gate to Mosul, and an archaeological site, Nimrud, very important as well for those who love the Iraqi heritage.
So, William, a lot has happened today, as Judit was saying. ISIL took Mosul over 2 years ago. Why do you think it's taken this long for the offensive to begin?
Well, it took a long time for the Iraqis to overcome the humiliation of losing Mosul so early on and so quickly. So there was a period of reconstructing the Iraqi army, if you like, or giving them the capabilities to take it back. So there's been a very steady process of international assistance to the Iraqi army to help them to recover the capacity to take back Mosul. So I suppose it's taken a bit longer. I mean, never has such an attack been so widely foretold. 2 years in the making. So ISIS have had plenty of time to dig in.
Absolutely. I wanted to look at that, the ISIL's tactics there in the city. What are they using, William, do you think, to defend their city?
Well, the question is whether they will defend it or not. I mean, I've seen reports that there are up to 8,000 ISIL fighters. They face a much larger force. They will presumably, as the battle begins to enter the city, they may come up against pocket resistance from the inhabitants. I would be surprised if what the military call shaping operations haven't been taking place inside the city already, and groups being primed to turn on ISIS. So the question is, how long will they fight? But they've had time to dig in, to lay booby traps, to build tunnels, and if they're intent on an urban guerrilla warfare, we've seen in places like Ramadi and Fallujah what a determined enemy can do in an urban environment.
Judith, what do you think about ISIS battle tactics are here?
Yeah, the tactics very clearly are also the use of bomb vehicles. And on the front line, they have been using them quite a bit today. The only thing that you can do against them is really heavy weaponry or air attacks. And in one case, it could not be prevented that one of those cars drove into the Peshmerga troops, and 5 Peshmerga were killed and a number wounded, amongst them the son of a political leader. So this is quite a blow here. But as for the tactics, at the moment they are mainly going through the villages and the smaller towns towards Mosul. Many of them are just about empty, but ISIS is there in the tunnels indeed, and with the booby traps and the explosives. And it seems that today the Peshmerga has been very successful, and the Iraqi army as well, to get through relatively unharmed.
Hala, let's look at the civilians. Can you give us a sense of how many people are trapped in Mosul and what the situation is there for them?
Well, you know, when you talk about Mosul, it's been divided into 4 zones. So my area of speciality is mainly in Zone 4, which is southern parts of Mosul, including Jazeera and part of the Shirkat, unliberated cities belonging to Salah ad-Din, and extending up to Hammam al-Alil. And we thought we were talking about a number that is much higher than what we actually find there when we go for the aid for the liberated cities. The villages have been kind of moving, shifting, the population shifting between those who had been affiliated to ISIS. They tend to leave the city after the liberation. They are not welcome there anymore. But we are talking about numbers in around 75,000 in Jazeera, the population initially. Many of them left But we do know about pockets of 30,000 in Shura and another 25,000 in another place. So, but apart from that, like Judith rightly mentioned, we are talking about small pockets of numbers of families, starting from 50 up to 200 families per village.
But what about in Mosul itself? I mean, what measures are being taken there to protect the people who remain?
Well, the plan, according to the UN and the Iraqi government plan, the camps have been set. Most of them were set towards the Kurdistan region, less on the southern part. The numbers of those that are already to accommodate people, I think 7 camps are already completed, others are under assessment. The capacity ranges from 5,000 to 1,000, and that is yet way below the expected number of 700,000 at least expected to flee Mosul once the bombardment starts and the actual battle in Mosul takes place. But again, who would know? We were thinking much more people are going to leave Jazeera when the liberation started on 4th of August, but yet many people preferred to stay and moved within the Jazeera itself rather than leaving the place. And that is very much due to the lack of services available for the internally displaced once they leave their place. So you can never make a judgment that this is the number, but we have to be ready anyway for the movement of people.
Okay.
I mean, this year there has been 400,000 people out of Mosul already. So.
Yes, we'll certainly look a little bit more about the situation of IDPs in Iraq just a little later in the discussion. First of all, Judith, I just want to focus a little bit more on Mosul, because if people do want to flee the city at the moment, are they able to? Are there any safe routes?
No, the problem is that really there is not a corridor. People will have to pass the front lines. The Iraqi army has said that they will create a corridor, but mostly the problem is not the Kurdish side of the Tigris River, but the other side. On the Kurdish side, people will be able to reach the Kurdistan region and the camps there. But on the other side, we're quite unsure how people are going to get out. And we haven't for today had any news about civilians getting out, which is strange if you hear about the Iraqi army already capturing towns. So there is a bit of insecurity about what is really happening to them. And then, of course, the problem at the moment that we see here is that we know that there's not enough place in camps created yet. They're still building camps. The UN wants to have space for over 700,000 people, and they don't have that at the moment.
William, there's a big fear, isn't there, about how ISIL might be using civilians that are trapped in the city. What have you been hearing about the situation they may be caught in?
Well, we've heard about high levels of intimidation by ISIL, refusing to let people who wanted to leave the city leave. So they clearly want to limit the options for the advancing army and for airstrikes and the like. And we know from experience that Daesh ISIL are ruthless. They're likely to use civilian population as shields. They're likely to try and fight out of hospitals and schools and other areas where there might be inhibitions on the part of the attacking forces. So we can expect this. We can expect it to be messy and bloody. And the message for the civilians would be, and I think the Iraqi government have given this message through leaflets, is to keep their head down, stay indoors, and try and avoid the fighting. And that's probably the best advice at the moment. They wouldn't be there's no, as your previous guests have said, there's no safe passage, so the best thing to do is to stay put.
I mean, it's interesting, is it, because many people welcomed ISIL when it arrived in Mosul some 2 years ago. So to what extent do you think, Judith, the group has assimilated into the population?
That's a very good question, and when you speak to people from Mosul, they say, we Maslawis are different. We have our own mind, and in this case, many people who left Mosul when ISIS came or in the past 2 years, and they are now here in Erbil, they say people will rebel. Part of them will get into their deep cellars because they have very deep cellars in the houses in Mosul, and others will just come and help the troops against ISIS. And the Iraqi army is actually counting on that. One of the things on the flyers that were dropped was to ask the people to help them, because without the help of the civilians, it will indeed be very, very, very messy.
Do you think the civilians will offer that help? I mean, there's so much distrust, isn't there, with the Iraqi army and Baghdad?
Yeah, this is the problem, and that's why the Iraqi army and the Peshmerga are the only forces allowed to go into the town. Not the Hashd al-Shabi, the Shiite militias, which are supported by Iran. If Turkey does get involved, it will not be allowed to go into Mosul, because it is so important to get the civilians to work with the forces. And the fear is mainly for the Shiite, because of course ISIS has used this discourse to frighten people. They have told them about how many Sunnis were killed or imprisoned or are still missing in Fallujah and Ramadi and Tikrit when it was liberated and the Hashd al-Shabi was involved.
Hala, this is going to be a very traumatized population. What efforts are being made to, first of all, cope with their physical demands, but also their mental demands when they're finally liberated from ISIL?
Yeah, well, in this case, I think the civil society is taking a lead in terms of planning, and actually they started already training. Even the UN started training. My organization also, in collaboration with some US-based organizations specialized in mental and trauma relief training is required. We're talking about generation that's been taught for 2 years under ISIS, and according to their approach and their understanding of how to address violence. So those need to go into rehabilitation of psychological support. Sexual abuse is a big issue. Training on case management of rape is currently being conducted by the UN, UNFPA and others. So this is very important for the coming stage, but there is a lot to deal with the physical part. You know, the ISIS does make everyone who leaves pay a very high price, including disabling them. We had many of people leaving Shirkat and Gayara being disabled by ISIS because they did not pay enough money to leave their locations. So it is a lot. It's a big community, and it will take time to heal. But the focus, unfortunately, now is the first response is that get them out of there, help them, save them, rather than and then plan for further, let's say, second phase response projects.
William, you know, post-battle, looking at Mosul, there's going to be this vacuum of power. So many different players in this coalition currently fighting ISIL. How is this power play going to play out?
Well, I think the actual recovery of Mosul is going to seem the easy part in the future. After the Iraqi army takes Mosul, how it's governed and how the rule of law is re-established, and how much inclusion of the Sunni population is achieved will be critical, because Mosul could become a reflection of Iraq's own problems, which are far from resolved. We see them played out in Baghdad. You have political problems with Nouri al-Maliki undermining Haider al-Abadi's government, and you've still got the disputes between the Kurds and the Baghdad government. And then you've got this alienated Sunni population that needs to be somehow brought into the political framework. So Mosul is going to be a microcosm of Iraq's wider problems, and it's going to be very, very difficult. Even if the Iraqi government achieves the aim of liberating Mosul using mainly the Iraqi army and without the Shia militia, You've got Sunni disputes. The sacking of Hala al-Abedi, the Minister of Defence, was more about inter-Sunni disputes than it was about anything else. So the problems post the liberation of Mosul will be infinitely greater than the actual physical liberation.
Judit, how do the people of Mosul themselves want their city governed?
The people in Mosul, the problem is, of course, that we don't hear them, and this is one of the major problems at the moment. We know that the former governor of Mosul, Najafi, is involved. He's got a little army that will be involved in the liberation. But we also know that not all the Maslawis are a fan of him. We know that that inside Mosul, there's also the different groups that were already there when ISIS came, the different religious groups. They might still play a role. So it's very difficult to say how Mosul is going to be ruled. But one thing we do get from the Maslawis who do get their message out, they want to be their own, they want to make their own decision, they want to be their own ruler. That's a very important one for them.
Okay. William, ISIL, where does it go after Mosul? I mean, it's lost its last stronghold in Iraq. Does it flee to Syria? Is it on the back foot?
Well, it is on the back foot. It's been shrinking for some time now. I think it's lost 50% of the territory it once held. So I think we're seeing the slow physical collapse of the so-called Caliphate. The problem then is not so much the territory they run, but the ideology that they have spawned. So it'll be more of an ideological battle than a physical battle. I think we'll see manifestations of ISIL or the Caliphate in other places, as we've seen in Libya. So I think we are seeing the slow demise. I think eventually ISIL will be defeated in Syria, but that's not the end of the problem.
No. And another lasting issue will, of course, be all the people who are displaced internally by this battle, as we've already seen in Ramadi, as we've seen in Fallujah. Hala, what is your organisation and other NGOs actually doing to prepare for this rush of people, especially with the onset of winter?
Okay, so we've been working actually in two directions. One is to help the returnees to go back to the cities that are liberated, such as Fallujah, Al-Garma, and and Ramadi itself. And that by itself is becoming very slow. There is a slow return because of lack of services in these locations. And of course, now we are all geared up towards preparation for the displacement of Mosul. My organization, as well as not many others, I must admit, are ready for Mosul as inside Mosul. Most of the organizations are working around Mosul corridors, Kirkuk, Salahuddin, but inside Mosul, there has been little response. I guess it's because of the isolation that ISIS put around the cities. And we must remember that only Gayara was liberated only in August, towards the end of August. So there is not much time to start building some kind of voluntary groups, but very few of us did. We, thank God, we managed to do that. Okay. And we are ready to support the south and the east. Okay. But and that's because of the tribal nature of the Arab tribes that is continuing from Salahuddin. So we are going through that line.
Okay. Hala, we do have to leave the discussion there for today. We've been trying to cover an awful lot of topics in a short space of time. Plenty more to discuss in the coming days and weeks to come of this offensive. Many thanks to all our guests for joining us here today. Judit Neurink, William Patey and Hala al-Sarraf. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website. That's aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here, bye for now.